Picture this: your fingertips brushing against the cold, uneven surface of a cave wall, tracing the outline of a bison painted in ochre and charcoal over 20,000 years ago. The artist who left this mark is long gone, but their voice echoes across time, whispering secrets about the world they knew. These ancient images aren't just art. They're humanity's first love letter to existence itself, a testament to our ancestors' awe and curiosity about life's greatest mysteries. Today, we're stepping into their footsteps, unraveling how prehistoric cultures turned caves into canvases, stones into stories, and the night sky into a celestial map of meaning. What drove these early artists to capture the flicker of firelight on rock, or to carve spirals into megaliths that align with the solstice sun? It wasn't just survival, it was something deeper. These were people who looked at the world around them and felt the irresistible urge to say, "I was here, I saw this, it mattered." From the hauntingly beautiful horses of Lascaux to the towering stone circles of Stonehenge, every stroke and symbol was a way to freeze time, to make sense of the unseen forces that shaped their lives. They documented storms and stars, births and deaths, weaving them into a tapestry of belief and wonder that still tugs at our imagination today. This journey isn't just about decoding symbols or admiring ancient techniques, it's about connecting with the very heart of what makes us human. Our ancestors didn't have written language, but they had something just as powerful: the ability to transform observation into legacy. As we explore these early records together, you'll discover how a handprint on a cave wall became a bridge between worlds, how a constellation etched into bone held the secrets of the seasons, and why these creations still resonate with us millennia later. By the end of this video, you'll see these ancient wonders not as distant relics, but as part of a story that's still being told, one that began when the first human looked up at the stars and dared to ask, "What else is out there?" Long before the first alphabet was carved into clay, humanity had already perfected a universal language, one painted in bold strokes of red ochre and charcoal, etched into stone by firelight, or scratched onto bones with flint tools. The caves of Lascaux and Altamira are like time capsules, their walls alive with galloping horses, towering bison, and herds of deer frozen mid-motion. But look closer and you'll notice something extraordinary. These aren't just random sketches. The animals overlap in precise layers, their proportions eerily accurate, their movements captured with an almost cinematic sense of drama. This wasn't doodling, it was storytelling. Take the famous Hall of Bulls in Lascaux, where a single panel stretches over 19 meters, a swirling mural of aurochs and horses that seems to pulse with energy. Researchers believe these compositions weren't just art for art's sake, they were visual encyclopedias. The way certain animals are grouped, the seasonal details in their coats, even the placement of hoof prints and arrows all suggest these were teaching tools, meant to pass down hunting strategies or migratory patterns. Imagine an elder pointing to a painted mammoth, using the image to explain how to track its movements or where to aim a spear. These caves were humanity's first classrooms. But there's another layer to these paintings, one that shimmers with something harder to define. In the deepest chambers of these caves, far from daylight, artists mixed pigments with cave water or animal fat, sometimes blowing paint through hollow bones to create hand stencils, ghostly outlines that say, "I was here." Some walls show the same animal painted over and over, like prayers made visible. At Altamira, a bison's back follows the natural curve of the rock, turning stone into muscle. Was this reverence, magic, a way to honor the spirits of the hunted? Whatever the motive, one thing is clear: these artists weren't just observing nature, they were seeking communion with it. And then there are the mysteries that still baffle us. Why do so many caves feature abstract symbols, dots, zigzags, grids repeated across continents and millennia? Could they be early star maps, ritual symbols, or even the beginnings of written language? In Spain's El Castillo cave, a red disc dated to over 40,000 years ago might be the oldest known cave painting, a single pulse of color left by someone whose name we'll never know, but whose impulse feels deeply familiar. It's the same urge that drives a child to trace their hand in wet sand, or an astronaut to etch initials on the moon, the need to say, "This is me, this is my world." What's astonishing isn't just the skill of these ancient artists, but the universality of their vision. From the charcoal mammoths of Storyt to the dancing shamans of Tassili Enaja, these images transcend time. They remind us that creativity isn't a modern luxury, it's as vital to survival as fire or tools. When an Ice Age artist dipped a finger into crushed manganese to draw a trembling horse, they weren't just decorating a wall. They were building a bridge across millennia, whispering to us, "Look, this is how the world felt when it was new." Imagine a world without books, without scrolls, without even a single written word, yet knowledge thrives, pulsing through generations like a heartbeat. This was the power of oral tradition, humanity's first living library. Long before ink touched parchment, stories were the glue that held cultures together, passed from elder to child around flickering fires, each retelling breathing new life into old wisdom. These weren't just tales, they were survival manuals, moral compasses, and sacred maps all woven into one. Take the Aboriginal Dreamtime stories, where every rock, river, and constellation holds a lesson. A tale about the rainbow serpent isn't just mythology, it's a guide to water sources, a warning about floods, and a spiritual blueprint for respecting the land. These narratives did something extraordinary. They turned landscapes into living storybooks. A child learning about the Seven Sisters constellation wasn't just memorizing stars. They were absorbing navigation skills, seasonal cycles, and the consequences of breaking tribal law. Oral traditions didn't just describe the world, they encoded it. But how did these stories stay so precise over centuries? The secret lies in their rhythm. Many cultures used poetic devices like repetition, rhyme, and melody as memory aids. The griots of West Africa, for example, trained for decades to master genealogies and historical epics, their voices becoming walking archives. In Scandinavia, skalds recited sagas with such exactitude that modern scholars found archaeological sites based solely on Viking poetry's geographic clues. These weren't casual campfire stories, they were meticulously crafted, with every detail serving a purpose. A misplaced word could mean forgetting which plant healed fever or where to find shelter during monsoons. What's truly remarkable is how these traditions shaped humanity's cosmic perspective. The Navajo creation story, for instance, describes how first man and first woman organized the chaos of the early world into order, mirroring their understanding of natural systems. When Polynesian navigators chanted star paths across the Pacific, they weren't just reciting routes, they were reaffirming their connection to the gods who guided them. Oral traditions didn't just explain the universe, they made it feel intimate, knowable, alive. Yet perhaps their greatest legacy was flexibility. Unlike static carvings or paintings, spoken stories evolved with their people. A drought might add new layers to a river spirit's tale. A volcanic eruption could reshape an origin myth. This adaptability made oral traditions resilient. When floods destroyed villages or migrations scattered tribes, the stories traveled too, adapting like seeds finding new soil. Even today, when a Yolngu elder sings an ancestor's songline in northern Australia, they're not just preserving history, they're adding to it, proving that some archives don't gather dust. They grow. Now let's turn our attention to petroglyphs, those silent messages hammered and chiseled into stone by hands that vanished millennia ago. Unlike cave paintings hidden in dark recesses, these carvings were made to endure under open skies, etched into cliff faces, boulders, and canyon walls where sunlight would dance across their grooves. Take the spiral petroglyphs of Newgrange in Ireland, swirling like frozen whirlpools. These aren't mere decorations, they're celestial timekeepers. During the winter solstice, a narrow beam of sunlight pierces the tomb's entrance, crawling along the passage until it illuminates that very spiral, a dramatic union of rock and sunlight that happens just once a year. This wasn't random, it was a prehistoric alarm clock marking the year's darkest day and the promised return of longer days ahead. Venture to the American Southwest and you'll find petroglyphs that tell a different kind of story. At Choco Canyon, desert bighorn sheep leap across sandstone panels, their stylized forms echoing the rhythms of migration. Nearby, humanoid figures with radiating headdresses seem to float above the earth. Some scholars suggest these depict shamans mid-ritual, bridging the physical and spirit worlds. But the real marvel, many of these carvings align with lunar standstills, those rare moments when the moon pauses at the extremes of its cycle. The ancestral Pueblones who carved them may have been tracking these events to predict eclipses or mark sacred times. Imagine standing beneath a full moon, its light catching the grooves of a petroglyph carved centuries earlier, suddenly revealing a hidden pattern, a moment of communion across time. What's fascinating is how these symbols transcend geography. In Scandinavia, Bronze Age artists pecked sun wheels and ships into rocks, possibly mapping the heavens or voyages to the afterlife. Australia's Murujuga holds the world's densest collection of petroglyphs, where some carvings of now extinct animals date back over 40,000 years. The recurring motif circles, zigzags, human footprints hint at a shared visual language, one that might have carried meaning across cultures separated by continents. Were these early attempts at writing, or perhaps spiritual symbols meant to be read only by initiates? The mystery deepens with petroglyphs that seem to record celestial disasters. A Navajo sandstone panel shows a crescent moon with a radiating circle, a possible depiction of the supernova that lit up the sky in the year 1054. Halfway across the world, a Welsh carving mirrors this pattern. Coincidence or proof that our ancestors were united not just by survival, but by wonder? Every chip in the rock whispers the same truth. They were watching, learning, trying to make sense of a universe far vaster than their tools could measure. And in doing so, they left us puzzles that still spark our curiosity today, invitations to look closer, to trace their lines with our fingers, and to wonder what they'd carve about our world if they could see it now. Deep in the caves of Europe, where torchlight flickers against damp walls, figures emerge that defy ordinary explanation: human bodies with antlered heads, dancers with limbs dissolving into geometric patterns, beings half human and half beast frozen mid-transformation. These aren't mistakes or fantasies, they're windows into the minds of shamans, the original explorers of consciousness. For prehistoric cultures, these visionary artists weren't just making art, they were mapping realms beyond everyday perception, turning their trance-induced journeys into a sacred visual language. The shaman's role was as vital as the hunters or healers. By entering altered states through rhythm, chanting, or psychoactive plants, they bridged the seen and unseen worlds, returning with insights that shaped their community's survival. The famous sorcerer of Les Trois Frères cave, a painted figure with stag antlers, owl eyes, and a wolf's tail, epitomizes this duality. Scholars believe such hybrid beings represent the shaman's ability to shapeshift spiritually, borrowing powers from animals to heal, divine, or negotiate with forces governing weather and prey. These images weren't mere mythology. They were instruction manuals for navigating life's mysteries. But how did these experiences translate into documentation? Look closely at cave panels like those in South Africa's Drakensberg Mountains, where human figures bleed into zigzag lines or float weightlessly. These motifs mirror the neurological effects of trance states, tunnels, spirals, and vibrating patterns reported across cultures during altered consciousness. By etching these visions onto stone, shamans created a shared vocabulary for the ineffable. A San Roque painting of an eland with red lines radiating from its back might depict not just the animal, but the life force the shaman accessed during ritual. This wasn't symbolism, it was direct reporting. The connection between shamanism and death is especially poignant. In Indonesia's Sulawesi caves, hand stencils surround a painted boar in what might be a funeral scene. Some stencils are missing fingers, a practice seen in modern hunter-gatherer rites where joint removal signifies mourning. Here, art becomes a bridge between worlds, the shaman's brushstrokes guiding the departed. Similarly, Scandinavia's Bronze Age petroglyphs often show sun disks and ships alongside human figures, possibly mapping the soul's journey after death as described in shamanic voyages. What's revolutionary is how these practices democratized wisdom. Unlike later written records controlled by elites, shamanic art was communal. The act of painting or carving was itself ritual, pigments mixed with sacred ochre, brushes made from ancestral bones. When a shaman in Spain's Cueva de los Letreros dipped fingers into paint to create the Brujo figure, arms raised, skirt swirling, they weren't just recording a vision but inviting others to witness it. This collaborative documentation laid groundwork for everything from religious texts to scientific observation, proving that the urge to record and share transcendent knowledge is as old as humanity itself. Perhaps the most striking legacy of shamanic art is its honesty about uncertainty. Unlike later dogmatic texts, these images embrace ambiguity. Figures half emerged from stone, overlapping animals that could be transforming or disappearing. They remind us that for our ancestors, the unknown wasn't something to fear but to explore, one trance, one brushstroke at a time. In an era when we still grapple with life's biggest questions, these ancient galleries whisper a timeless truth. Some answers aren't found in the light, but in the flickering shadows where the mind dances with the mysteries of existence. Standing before the towering stones of Göbekli Tepe, carved with intricate animals and symbols over 11,000 years ago, you can almost feel the weight of forgotten knowledge pressing against your skin. This isn't just an archaeological site, it's a prehistoric planetarium, a stone-bound archive of celestial wisdom. The pillars here, some weighing more than 16 tons, weren't merely arranged for show. Their precise alignments catch the first rays of the equinox sun, illuminating carvings of scorpions and vultures in a dramatic play of light and shadow. What's staggering isn't just the scale of these monuments, but what they reveal about their builders' obsession with documenting time itself. Take Stonehenge, where the summer solstice sun rises perfectly between the heel stone and slaughter stone, casting a dagger of light across the altar. But here's the twist: the builders didn't just mark the solstice, they encoded generations of lunar cycles into the architecture. The 56 Aubrey holes circling the site likely functioned as a primitive calendar, tracking eclipses by moving stones from hole to hole over decades. Imagine the patience required to pass this knowledge down orally, refining it over centuries until stone mirrored sky with uncanny precision. These weren't just rituals, they were experiments in cosmic record-keeping. The Karnak stones in France take this concept further, with nearly 3,000 megaliths stretching over 4 kilometers like a frozen army. Local folklore claims their Roman soldiers turned to stone, but the truth is stranger. Some alignments point to sunset during the winter solstice, while others frame the moon's extreme northern positions. Recent studies suggest the entire complex might be a colossal memory aid, where walking past specific stones triggered oral recitations of star lore or agricultural cycles. Think of it as an ancient PowerPoint presentation, each monolith a slide in a stone slideshow. What's revolutionary about these sites is their universality. On Malta's Haga Kim Temple, a small window aligns so the spring equinox sun projects a perfect square of light onto a stone slab inside, a phenomenon replicated in Newgrange's winter solstice light show. Separated by thousands of kilometers and years, these cultures arrived at eerily similar solutions for freezing celestial movements in stone. Was this independent genius or fragments of a shared ancestral knowledge now lost to time? The real magic lies in how these monuments democratized wisdom. Unlike later written records guarded by elites, stone circles were communal textbooks. At Portugal's Almenda's Cromlech, spirals carved into menhirs might represent the sun's path, while nearby cup and ring marks could tally lunar phases. Farmers, hunters, and children would have absorbed this knowledge simply by gathering there, their fingers tracing the grooves as elders explained their meaning. These weren't just temples, they were the world's first open-access universities, where the curriculum was written in sunlight and shadow, yet mysteries remain. Why do so many megalithic sites incorporate acoustic properties? Experiments at Scotland's Ring of Brodgar show certain stones amplify specific frequencies when struck, suggesting sound may have been part of their celestial documentation. And what to make of Göbekli Tepe's Pillar 43, where a vulture clutches a round object beside a scorpion, an ancient depiction of a comet impact? The more we study these stone libraries, the clearer it becomes. Our ancestors weren't primitive stargazers, they were cosmic cartographers, etching the rhythms of the universe into landscapes where their descendants could still read them millennia later. Their greatest lesson: knowledge doesn't need paper to endure, just imagination, determination, and a few well-placed tons of rock. A charging bison painted in ochre seems to leap from the walls of Storyt cave, its muscles tensed, its horns poised as if frozen mid-motion. This isn't just an artistic masterpiece, it's a conversation across time, a glimpse into how our ancestors saw themselves within the web of life. Animals dominate prehistoric art not as passive subjects, but as active players in a shared world, their images pulsing with meaning that goes far beyond mere decoration. From the mammoths of Rufignac to the reindeer etched into Scandinavian cliffs, these creatures weren't just food or threats. They were teachers, ancestors, even spiritual conduits. Consider the way certain animals appear repeatedly across cultures. In France's Lascaux cave, horses outnumber all other species, often painted with intricate spotted coats that match real prehistoric breeds. Yet in the same caves, predators like lions and bears are rare, not because they weren't feared, but perhaps because they held taboo significance. Meanwhile, in Australia's Arnhem Land, rainbow serpents and thylacines dominate rock art, reflecting species integral to local cosmology. This wasn't random selection, it was a deliberate documentation of relationships. A bison painted with arrows might record a hunt, but one surrounded by handprints could signify gratitude or a plea for herd renewal. The difference between a meal and a deity often lay in the artist's brushstrokes. The spiritual dimension runs deep. At El Castillo cave in Spain, a red deer painted with its head turned backward seems to gaze at the viewer, an impossible pose in life, suggesting supernatural awareness. Similarly, the hybrid lion man figurine from Germany, carved 40,000 years ago, blends human and animal traits in a way that hints at shape-shifting beliefs. These weren't just imaginative exercises, they were attempts to capture the fluidity between worlds. For hunter-gatherers, animals weren't separate from humanity. They were kin, mentors, even ancestors returned in new forms. A Siberian petroglyph showing a bear with human eyes or a Navajo rock carving of a mountain sheep with ceremonial markings both whisper the same truth. The boundary between human and animal was porous, alive with possibility. Practical knowledge flowed through these images too. The seasonal details in cave art, pregnant mares in spring, bulls in rutting season, suggest these were ecological calendars as much as spiritual symbols. At Sweden's Nämforsen, migrating elk are carved alongside salmon runs, creating a stone infographic of nature's rhythms. Even abstract symbols accompanying animals may hold clues. The zigzags near Altamira's bison could represent rivers, while dots might tally lunar cycles tied to migrations. This art didn't just reflect the world, it organized it, turning chaos into something understandable and shared. What's most striking is the emotional resonance these images still carry today. When you stand before a cave painting of a woolly rhinoceros, its fur textured with deliberate strokes, you're not just seeing an animal, you're witnessing awe. These artists could render a horse's gallop with motion-blurred legs millennia before photography captured the same effect. They understood anatomy, behavior, and the weight of a gaze. In that sense, prehistoric art isn't primitive, it's profoundly observant, a testament to the depth of attention our ancestors paid to their fellow creatures. The next time you see a bird in flight or a deer at the forest's edge, try seeing it through their eyes, not as separate from you, but as part of an unbroken dialogue that began when the first human pressed a palm to stone and thought, "This is how we belong together." Beneath the flickering torchlight of a cave 20,000 years ago, a group gathers around a body carefully laid to rest, its bones dusted with red ochre and adorned with shell beads. This isn't just a burial, it's humanity's first attempt to press pause on the relentless march of time to say, this life mattered. From the decorated graves of Sungir in Russia to the flower-strewn tombs of Shanidar Cave, prehistoric rituals were more than traditions. They were living archives documenting beliefs about death, the afterlife, and the invisible threads connecting the community to the cosmos. Every bead placed, every symbol carved, was a sentence in a story meant to outlast memory itself. Take the discovery of a 12,000-year-old shaman's grave in Israel, buried with 50 tortoise shells, a leopard's pelvis, and an eagle's wing. These weren't random objects, they were a curated collection, a ritual toolkit frozen in time. The arrangement tells us what words never could, how this culture viewed the journey beyond death, what powers they believed the deceased would need. Similarly, at Peru's Carol Soup site, offerings of quinoa and seashells found in ceremonial pits reveal a civilization attuned to both agricultural cycles and trade networks, their rituals mapping the physical and spiritual landscape in one gesture. But rituals didn't just document beliefs, they reinforced them through repetition. Imagine the impact of a solstice ceremony where sunlight struck the same cave painting year after year, or a coming-of-age rite where adolescents traced the same handprints their ancestors had left centuries earlier. These acts transformed abstract ideas into muscle memory, embedding knowledge deeper than any lecture could. The Aboriginal practice of singing country, where songs describe landmarks so precisely they function as maps, shows how ritual becomes a living database, updating with each generation while preserving core truths. Music and dance added another layer to this documentation. In Ukraine, 6,000-year-old bone flutes carved from mammoth tusks play notes that still resonate today, their pentatonic scales suggesting sophisticated musical traditions. Pair these with the rhythmic footprints preserved in French cave mud, evidence of ceremonial dances, and you can almost hear the stomping, chanting, and drumming that once turned caves into concert halls. These weren't just performances, they were mnemonic devices using rhythm to encode migration routes, genealogies, or celestial events. A single dance might contain the history of a people, their bodies becoming the parchment. Perhaps the most profound rituals involved transformation. The masks of the Dorset culture, carved with half-human, half-animal features, weren't mere costumes, they were portals. When worn during ceremonies, they allowed wearers to channel ancestral spirits or animal guides, blurring the line between observer and participant. Similarly, the cave paintings where human figures are depicted with antlers or bird wings suggest rituals where identities temporarily dissolved, allowing new knowledge to emerge. These acts of becoming, whether through masks, trance, or body paint, were experiments in empathy, ways to document the fluidity of existence itself. What's striking is how these ancient ceremonies mirror modern needs. The Inca's Capacocha rituals, where offerings were made to mountain gods during droughts, weren't so different from today's climate marches. Both are attempts to negotiate with forces beyond human control. The difference: prehistoric cultures documented these negotiations not in petitions or policy papers, but in actions repeated until they became part of the land's DNA. When we walk through a forest where every rock has a story or stand before a megalith aligned to the stars, we're not just seeing history, we're witnessing the world's oldest living library, its shelves made of earth and sky, its texts written in bone and firelight. The oldest known musical instrument, a vulture bone flute found in Germany's Hohlfels cave, hums a haunting note when played, one that hasn't been heard in over 40,000 years. This delicate artifact, carved with 5 precise finger holes, is more than a relic. It's a key to understanding how prehistoric cultures turned sound into a living record. Across Europe and beyond, similar flutes made from swan bones or mammoth ivory reveal a startling truth. Music wasn't just entertainment for our ancestors. It was a sophisticated language of memory, a way to encode everything from animal behavior to celestial cycles into melodies that could outlast generations. Consider the repetitive rhythms found in many prehistoric compositions. A replica of a Chinese bone flute from 9,000 years ago plays a pentatonic scale, the same 5-note pattern found in folk music worldwide. This isn't coincidence, it's evidence of universal auditory patterns that helped oral traditions stick. Like the steady beat of a shaman's drum mimicking a heartbeat, these rhythms may have served as mnemonic devices. The Maori of New Zealand, for instance, used rhythmic chants called haka to preserve genealogies spanning 60 generations. Similarly, the intricate melodies of Andean panpipes, descendants of ancient bone flutes, still carry encoded information about mountain trails and water sources. Sound, it seems, was humanity's first hard drive. Drums tell their own stories. In Ukraine, archaeologists uncovered a drum made from a mammoth skull, its surface worn smooth by millennia of hands. When struck, its deep resonance mimics the footsteps of the very creatures painted on cave walls, perhaps a sonic bridge between hunt and myth. Indigenous cultures today, like the Sami of Scandinavia, use similar drums adorned with symbols as navigational and spiritual maps. The parallel suggests prehistoric drummers weren't just keeping time, they were broadcasting complex information. A rapid tempo might signal danger, while a specific rhythm could summon specific spirits or recount migration routes. Then there are the instruments that defy simple explanation. In the French Pyrenees, researchers found bull roarers, flat pieces of bone that, when spun on a cord, produce a eerie, undulating wail. Used in Aboriginal coming-of-age ceremonies to represent ancestor voices, these devices may have been prehistoric audio hallucinations, simulating supernatural encounters during rituals. Likewise, seed rattles found in Mesopotamian graves, still containing dried berries, hint at sound's role in guiding souls. Each shake a step in the journey between worlds. What's revolutionary is how these sounds transcend language. A reconstruction of a Neolithic lyre, based on fragments found in Scotland, produces melodies that still stir emotion today. This universality suggests music wasn't just documenting facts, it was encoding feelings, communal memories too nuanced for words. When a Paleolithic mother hummed a lullaby into a bone flute, or hunters recreated a stag's bellow with a conch shell trumpet, they weren't just making noise. They were composing the first history books, written in vibrations that bypassed the need for alphabets. The real magic lies in music's collaborative nature. Unlike static cave paintings, songs required participation, breath, movement, shared attention. A communal chant around a fire didn't just preserve knowledge, it renewed it with every performance, adapting like oral stories while maintaining core truths. From the mammoth-tusk xylophones of Siberia to the clay whistles mimicking bird calls in Mesoamerica, these instruments remind us that for our ancestors, the universe wasn't silent. It was a symphony waiting to be decoded, one resonant note at a time. The oldest known tattoo kit, discovered in Tonga and dating back 2,700 years, contains needles made from sharpened bird bone and ink-stained seashells, tools that transformed human skin into living parchment. Across the globe, from the ice-bound tombs of Siberia to the sun-baked caves of Algeria, our ancestors turned their bodies into walking archives, etching symbols of belonging, protection, and transcendence into their very flesh. The 2,500-year-old ice maiden of the Altai Mountains, her skin adorned with elaborate animal tattoos, wasn't just decorated. She carried a constellation of stories on her shoulders, mythic stags leaping toward her neck, fish swimming down her wrists, a cosmology written in ink and blood. But body art went far deeper than skin. In Australia's Arnhem Land, indigenous cultures practiced scarification, raising intricate patterns on the skin through controlled healing, a process both painful and sacred. These raised designs weren't merely aesthetic, they mirrored the ridged bark of eucalyptus trees or the tracks of ancestral beings, physically connecting wearers to the land. Similarly, the elongated lip plates of Ethiopia's Mercy people or the neck rings of Southeast Asia's Padang women find their roots in prehistoric practices, where modified bodies served as living records of cultural identity. A stretched earlobe might denote wisdom gained through seasons, while a patterned scar could map a rite of passage from childhood to adulthood. Jewelry told equally complex stories. The 130,000-year-old eagle talon necklaces found in Croatia weren't just ornaments, they were power objects, linking wearers to the bird's keen vision and command of the skies. In California's Channel Islands, beads crafted from Olivella shells traveled hundreds of kilometers inland, becoming a prehistoric currency that wove distant communities into a shared economic and spiritual network. Even the humble red ochre dusted on bones in South Africa's Blombos cave hints at something profound. When mixed with fat and applied to skin, it became more than pigment. It was a second skin of symbolism, perhaps marking blood ties, mourning, or sacred ceremonies. The real revelation lies in how universal these practices were. Otzi the Iceman, preserved in alpine ice for 5,300 years, bears 61 tattoos, lines and crosses etched over his joints, matching modern acupuncture points for pain relief. Was this early medicine, spiritual armor, or both? Meanwhile, in Japan's Jomon period, clay figurines called dogu display swirling body patterns that may reflect real tattoos used to ward off evil spirits. From the charcoal-stained teeth of ancient Maya royalty to the hematite lip paint of Neolithic Anatolia, these weren't frivolous decorations. They were visual contracts with the unseen world, announcements of status, or even maps of the soul's journey. Perhaps most moving are the subtle traces, the imprint of a shell necklace left in the soil of a child's grave, or the way a skeleton's bones still hold flecks of pigment after millennia. These intimate details whisper that for our ancestors, adorning the body was as natural as breathing, a way to say, "This is who I am, where I belong, and what I dare to dream." When a Paleolithic hunter strung wolf teeth around his neck or a Neolithic mother braided seeds into her hair, they weren't just accessorizing. They were writing their autobiographies in a language that needed no alphabet, one that still speaks to us across the chasm of time. Gazing upward on a clear night, prehistoric eyes traced patterns in the stars that became as familiar as the contours of their own hands. The Nebra sky disk, crafted from bronze and gold in Germany around 1600 BCE, captures this celestial intimacy, a shimmering mosaic of sun, moon, and Pleiades constellations suspended against a star-studded background. But this wasn't just a pretty object, it was a portable observatory. The golden arcs along its edges precisely mark the solstice sunrises and sunsets, turning the disk into a handheld calendar for planting and harvest. Imagine a farmer holding it aloft, aligning the gold curves with the horizon to predict when the first frost might come. This blend of art and astronomy reveals something profound. For our ancestors, the sky wasn't just a spectacle, it was a survival manual written in light. Megalithic architects took this celestial documentation to staggering scales. The Callanish stones in Scotland form a cross-shaped alignment where the central monolith points directly to the rising moon during its 18.6-year lunar standstill, an event so rare it might only be witnessed once in a person's lifetime. Nearby, Newgrange's entrance captures the winter solstice sunrise in a beam of light so precise, modern engineers struggle to replicate its accuracy without lasers. These builders didn't just observe the heavens, they wove cosmic rhythms into the land itself, turning stone into a language that whispered of equinoxes and eclipses long after spoken words faded. But why invest such effort in tracking celestial events? The answer lies in the cycles that governed every aspect of life. In Choco Canyon, petroglyphs spiral like galaxies, some recording the supernova of 1054 CE that blazed brighter than Venus for weeks. For the ancestral Pueblones, this wasn't just a light show. It might have signaled drought or abundance, as their cosmology linked celestial events to earthly cycles. Similarly, the Aboriginal songlines of Australia don't just map the land. They mirror the Milky Way, with each star correlating to waterholes or sacred sites. Lose the stars and you lose your way home. The real genius lies in how these cultures translated cosmic knowledge across generations. The Bronze Age gold hats of Europe, cones shaped and engraved with thousands of symbols, may have served as astronomical calculators, their bands representing lunar months, allowing wearers to predict eclipses by twisting the hat to align with the horizon. Meanwhile, the Babylonians etched eclipse predictions onto clay tablets using the Saros cycle, a pattern they likely inherited from even earlier oral traditions. This wasn't mere stargazing, it was data science avant la lettre, with megaliths as hard drives and stories as algorithms. What's haunting is how these star stories persist. The same Pleiades cluster on the Nebra disk guided Polynesian navigators across the Pacific and told Greek farmers when to harvest, Today, when we look up at Orion's belt or the Big Dipper, we're seeing the same constellations that comforted a child in Çatalhöyük 6,000 years ago. The stars have changed little, but our ancestors' legacy lies in how they taught us to listen, to hear in the silence between stars not emptiness, but a chorus of stories waiting to be remembered. Their greatest gift wasn't just mapping the sky, but showing us how to find ourselves within it. Long before libraries held scrolls or tablets bore cuneiform, myths wove the fabric of reality itself, threading together the mundane and the miraculous into stories so resilient they outlasted civilizations. Take the Epic of Gilgamesh, whose roots stretch back to Sumerian oral traditions over 4,000 years ago. On the surface, it's a tale of a king's quest for immortality, but peel back the layers and you'll find a prehistoric archive hiding in plain sight. The flood narrative alone mirrors geological evidence of ancient Mesopotamian deluges, suggesting these weren't just fables but encrypted memories of cataclysmic events. When a storyteller described the gods raining down destruction, they might have been documenting an actual tsunami that erased coastal villages, preserving the trauma in a form too vital to forget. Myths did more than record disasters, they mapped the human psyche onto the landscape. The Aboriginal Dreamtime stories of Australia transform rock formations into frozen moments of ancestral drama. That jagged cliff, it's the spine of a creator serpent who shaped the rivers. That cluster of boulders, their eggs laid by the emu in the sky constellation. By encoding topography into narrative, these myths turned wandering routes into sacred memory palaces. A child hearing about the rainbow serpent's path wasn't just entertained, they were learning where to find water holes during drought. The land became a storybook, each feature a paragraph written in stone. The genius of mythological documentation lies in its fluidity. Unlike static carvings, stories adapted with each telling, absorbing new details like sponges. The Greek legend of the Minotaur, for instance, might hold kernels of Bronze Age truths, the labyrinth echoing the sprawling palaces of Knossos, the bull cults verified by archaeologist Arthur Evans' discoveries. Similarly, the Navajo emergence myth, which describes climbing through successive worlds, aligns eerily with geological evidence of ancient migrations across the Bering Land Bridge. These stories weren't confined by literal accuracy. They distilled truths into symbols that could survive generations of retelling. But perhaps myth's most revolutionary function was their ability to encode ethics and ecology into compelling metaphor. The Cherokee story of the first fire, where animals collaborate to bring flames to humanity, wasn't just a campfire tale. It was a lesson in interdependence, reminding listeners that survival required respecting all creatures. When the Haida of the Pacific Northwest spoke of ravens stealing sunlight, they weren't just explaining dawn, they were wrestling with themes of sacrifice and innovation. Even today, these narratives resonate because they document more than events. They capture the emotional and moral temperature of an era, preserving not just what people did, but how they felt about it. The real power of these ancient stories, they refused to be silenced. When archaeologists unearthed fragments of the Babylonian creation epic Enuma Elish, they found its cosmic battles mirrored in everything from Viking sagas to Polynesian chants. This wasn't coincidence, it was proof that myths traveled like seeds on the wind, taking root wherever humans sought to make sense of their world. The next time you hear a thunderclap and think of Thor's hammer, or see the Big Dipper and recall the Seven Sisters, you're not just remembering a story. You're accessing humanity's oldest living archive, one where every metaphor holds a hidden fossil of truth. Carved into the sun-warmed rock of Italy's Valcamonica, the Bidolina map stretches across an entire boulder like a prehistoric atlas. Its intricate network of lines and symbols doesn't just decorate the stone, it documents a living landscape. Squares cluster like patchwork fields, zigzagging paths connect circular huts, and stick-figure animals graze near dotted trails. Dating back over 3,000 years, this isn't just art. It's a snapshot of how Bronze Age people saw their world, a testament to their need to record not just what existed, but how it all fit together. What's astonishing is the precision. Certain pathways align with actual mountain passes still used by shepherds today, proving these maps weren't abstract doodles. They were functional guides etched by hands that knew every slope and stream by heart. But the Bidolina map is just one piece of a global puzzle. In the American Southwest, ancestral pueblones pecked spiral petroglyphs into canyon walls that mirror the constellations overhead, a celestial-terrestrial fusion where the land and sky became one navigational system. Meanwhile, Inuit hunters in the Arctic carved walrus ivory with coastlines so accurate, early European explorers used them to correct their own flawed charts. These maps didn't just mark geography, they encoded relationships. A zigzag might indicate a river's seasonal floods, while clusters of dots could signal prime foraging spots. For nomadic cultures, this knowledge wasn't convenience, it was survival. Lose the map, and you risked losing your way home. The real revelation lies in how these maps blend the practical and the sacred. Australia's Yolngu people create songlines, oral maps where every landmark is tied to a melody. Sing the song correctly, and you can walk hundreds of kilometers without ever seeing the terrain before. Similarly, the Nazca lines in Peru, those massive geoglyphs visible only from the air, may have served as ritual pathways for ceremonial processions, turning the desert itself into a sacred map only the gods could read whole. This duality, maps as both tool and talisman, shows how our ancestors refused to separate survival from spirituality. A trail wasn't just a route, it was a story written in footsteps. What's haunting is how these ancient cartographers anticipated modern techniques. The Inuits' ivory maps included raised ridges to represent mountain ranges, a tactile 3D system predating Braille by centuries. In Turkey's Çatalhöyük, a 9,000-year-old mural depicts a volcanic eruption so accurately, geologists identified the specific mountain. These weren't primitive sketches, they were observational masterpieces. When a Bronze Age artist in Scandinavia carved ship petroglyphs alongside migratory bird patterns, they were creating a seasonal guide for when to sail and when to stay ashore, a prehistoric GPS fueled by animal behavior and star cycles. Perhaps the most poignant lesson lies in what these maps leave out. Unlike modern maps cluttered with borders and place names, prehistoric versions focus almost exclusively on relationships between water and hunger, stars and seasons, humans and herds. The message is clear: to navigate the world, you must first understand your place within it. So the next time you glance at your phone's blinking location dot, remember, the impulse guiding you home is as old as the first handprint on a cave wall, as timeless as a songline humming beneath the stars. Stretching your palm against a cave wall, fingers splayed wide as ochre-stained breath puffs against cold stone. This simple act created humanity's first autograph. From the caves of Argentina to the rock shelters of Borneo, handprints and stencils appear like ghostly echoes, their negative spaces whispering across millennia. But these weren't casual graffiti. In France's Pechmerle cave, a child's handprint overlaps with spotted horses, the fingers visibly too small to belong to any adult artist. Was this a proud parent guiding their child's first artistic act, or something more profound? The answer may lie in the details. the way some prints are missing fingers, like those in Spain's Cueva de los Monos, where archaeologists found stencils with truncated digits matching ritual amputations still practiced by local tribes today. These weren't mistakes, they were badges of survival, perhaps marking initiation rites or mourning rituals. Color tells its own story. In Indonesia's Maros Pankep caves, hand stencils alternate between red and mulberry purple, a deliberate choice tied to local iron-rich clays. Yet in some French caves, red handprints cluster near cave entrances, while black ones appear only in the deepest chambers, a possible code separating sacred from mundane spaces. Even the application methods reveal intention. Some stencils show pigment sprayed evenly from the mouth, creating delicate halos around fingers. Others bear the ragged edges of blown reed tubes, suggesting communal ceremonies where multiple participants left marks together. The variation is too precise to be random. Each technique seems to carry unspoken meaning, like dialects in a visual language we're only beginning to decipher. Then there are the mysteries that raise goosebumps. In Gaga's cave, 150 stencils show hands with every finger intentionally folded, a gesture some researchers link to shamanic trance states, where curled fingers represent altered consciousness. Nearby, a single print stands out, a right hand with 6 fingers, carefully stenciled like a badge of honor rather than hidden as deformity. Was this person revered, feared, or seen as touched by spirits? The questions multiply when you notice how often handprints interact with other art. In Australia's Kimberley region, Guion figures, those elegant, elongated human forms, are frequently framed by hand stencils as if the artists were saying, "These are our people." Meanwhile, in Borneo's Lubang Jeraji Saleh, a handprint placed beside a bison radiates with palm lines accentuated in pigment, turning anatomy into artistry. The most haunting theory comes from acoustic archaeology. Many handprint-covered caves resonate at specific frequencies, the same ranges that induce trance states. When researchers in France's Rouffignac cave recreated prehistoric chanting near hand stencils, the sound waves made the pigments appear to shimmer in torchlight. Could these prints mark where voices once called to the spirits, their owners believing the very stone absorbed their prayers? From the toddler's smudged palm in Argentina's Cueva de los Monos to the outstretched adult hands frozen mid-dance in Egypt's Wadi Sura, one thread connects them all, an unshakable human need to say, "I was here." This is me, not with words, but with the most intimate signature of all the unique ridges and walls that even time couldn't erase. The Venus of Willendorf, that palm-sized figurine carved from Oolitic limestone over 25,000 years ago, cradles a revolution in her voluptuous curves. At just 4 inches tall, she commands attention. Her exaggerated breasts, rounded belly, and intricate braided hair whispering secrets about how prehistoric cultures saw femininity. But she's far from alone. From France's Venus of Lossel, holding a crescent horn like a sacred chalice, to Ukraine's Venus of Kostenki, etched with intricate geometric patterns, these figurines reveal a startling truth. Women weren't just subjects in prehistoric art, they were central to its very purpose. The careful scoring of pubic triangles on many Venus statues, the way some were designed to stand upright while others fit perfectly in a palm, each detail suggests these objects weren't idle carvings. They were talismans, teaching tools, perhaps even midwives' aids, documenting the mysteries of birth and nourishment in a world where survival depended on both. Look beyond the figurines, and women's presence in prehistoric documentation grows even more vivid. In Spain's Cueva del Civil, a mural shows a woman climbing a ladder to harvest honey from a wild beehive, her silhouette buzzing with purpose. Nearby, another painting depicts a woman cradling a child beneath a constellation, possibly the Pleiades, long associated with fertility cycles. These aren't passive scenes, they're celebrations of women's labor and wisdom. Even more telling are the hand stencils in Indonesia's Ling Timpuseng cave, where recent analysis revealed nearly half were made by women, their distinct finger proportions preserved in ochre. If hands were humanity's first signatures, women were signing their names just as often as men. The real game changer lies in the rituals. At Malta's Haga Kim Temple, statues of full-bodied women flank altars where traces of menstrual blood have been found, suggesting ceremonies that honored cycles rather than shunned them. In Çatalhöyük's sprawling Neolithic settlement, wall paintings show women presiding over leopard-skinned rituals, their arms raised in gestures mirrored by later priestesses across the Mediterranean. And let's not forget the Siberian princess of Yukok, her mummified body tattooed with mythical creatures, buried with 6 horses and a headdress that took weeks to craft. These weren't footnotes in history, they were living archives of women's spiritual and social authority. What's revolutionary is how these artifacts dismantle old assumptions. The famous Man of Bikorp cave painting, long thought to depict a male honey hunter, now sparks debate. Some researchers argue the figure's waistline and posture suggest a woman, re-evaluating gender roles in foraging societies. Similarly, the grinding stones found across early settlements, often dismissed as domestic tools, show microscopic residues of ochre and herbs, hinting at women's roles as early chemists mixing pigments for cave art or medicines for healing. Even the so-called goddess figurines might be more nuanced. Some wear belts carved with notches that could tally lunar cycles, turning them into portable calendars for tracking time or fertility. The most poignant evidence comes from the graves. At Norway's 500-year-old Vist cave, a young girl was buried with over 100 red deer teeth, each drilled for a now-vanished headdress, a funeral offering rivaling any chieftain's. In the Czech Republic, a woman's grave from the same period held a flint knife, bone awls, and a stone pallet stained with ochre, her tools arranged like an artist's kit. These burials whisper that women's work, whether carving, painting, or healing, wasn't just valued, it was revered enough to accompany them into eternity. So why does this matter today? Because every time we unearth another Venus or decode another mural, we're rewriting the story of human creativity. The hands that shaped these artifacts weren't just recording life, they were shaping its meaning, proving that the urge to document our world, its cycles, its struggles, its beauty, has always been as deeply feminine as it is human. The next time you see the Venus of Willendorf in a museum case, don't just admire her curves, see her for what she truly is, humanity's first librarian, holding the oldest book of all, the story of us. A single shell bead, worn smooth by centuries of touch, tells a story more vivid than any ledger. Found hundreds of kilometers from the nearest coast in a Neanderthal burial, this tiny artifact whispers of journeys we can barely imagine. From the obsidian blades of Çatalhöyük traded across Anatolia to Baltic amber discovered in Egyptian tombs, prehistoric cultures were connected by invisible highways long before the first wheel turned. But these exchanges weren't just about goods, they were the original social media, carrying ideas, art, and entire worldviews across continents. Take the cowrie shells of the Indus Valley, meticulously drilled and strung into necklaces found in the highlands of Afghanistan. More than currency, these shells carried meaning, their crescent shapes echoing lunar deities, their glossy surfaces symbolizing water's life-giving power. When a trader handed one to a distant mountain dweller, they weren't just swapping trinkets, they were sharing a piece of their cosmology. Similarly, the volcanic glass of Obsidian Cliff in Wyoming made its way to Ohio's Hopewell Mounds, traveling nearly 2,000 kilometers. Microscopic analysis reveals something extraordinary. Each flake retains the chemical signature of its origin, allowing archaeologists to trace not just trade routes, but the spread of flint knapping techniques. A single blade could carry generations of knowledge in its edge angles, teaching new hands how to pressure flake like masters from faraway lands. The real magic lies in how these objects transformed local art. In France's Dordogne region, reindeer antlers carved with Iberian motifs appear alongside Mediterranean shells, suggesting artists were blending styles like prehistoric Picassos. Meanwhile, the Lapita people of the Pacific stamped pottery with intricate designs that evolved as they island hopped their zigzags and dots, mutating like a visual game of telephone across generations. Perhaps most astonishing are the similarities between the spiral carvings of Ireland's Newgrange and those in the temples of Malta, separated by the entire width of Europe. Were these coincidences or proof that sacred symbols traveled with the traders who carried them? But trade's greatest legacy might be how it forced innovation in documentation. When the Olmec transported multi-ton basalt heads through jungles without wheels, they left behind roller paths of packed earth prehistoric FedEx tracking. The Minoans of Crete developed hieroglyphs to record shipments of saffron and olive oil, their clay tablets evolving into Europe's first writing system. Even something as simple as a string of Siberian mammoth ivory beads became a contract, each groove marking a debt to be repaid when the herds returned. What's humbling is realizing how little has changed. The Silk Road's ancestors were Paleolithic paths trodden by bare feet. The first emojis were pictographs scratched onto Mesopotamian clay. And that universal human urge to share not just goods, but the stories that make them meaningful, still pulses through every click of a send button today. The next time you hold a coffee bean from Ethiopia or a smartphone made in China, remember, you're part of a conversation that began when the first shell left the first beach in the hands of someone who dared to say, "You have to see this." A zigzag carved into a mammoth tusk 30,000 years ago mirrors the same pattern painted on a cliff face in Australia, separated by an ocean and millennia, yet eerily identical. These geometric designs, from the labyrinthine spirals of Newgrange to the concentric circles of Choco Canyon, form a silent language older than any alphabet. What's startling isn't just their persistence across continents, but how they flicker between meaning and mystery. In the dim glow of a cave torch, a grid of red lines might map the veins of a leaf one moment, then transform into a shaman's vision of the spirit world the next. Some patterns pulse with neurological inevitability. The hallucinogenic swirls in South Africa's Drakensberg caves, for instance, mirror the form constants reported during altered states tunnels, spirals, and lattices hardwired into human perception. When a San artist painted these shapes alongside antelope herds, were they documenting a trance journey where animals and geometries bled together? Similarly, the zigzags on Paleolithic bone flutes from Germany align with the rhythmic brainwave patterns induced by repetitive music. These weren't doodles, they were fingerprints of the mind itself, pressed into art during moments of transcendence. Yet other designs hint at practical ingenuity. The chevrons etched into Mesopotamian clay tokens around 9,000 years ago evolved into the first cuneiform numerals, proof that abstract symbols birthed writing. In Peru's Carol soup, knotted cords called quippers used knot patterns to record harvests and genealogies, their colorful strings a tactile binary code. Even the cup and ring marks scattered across European megaliths may have served as prehistoric chalkboards, their concentric grooves helping traders tally goods or priests track lunar cycles. A single dot surrounded by rings could mean one moon today, one bison tomorrow, a fluid system where context was everything. Nature offered its own geometric vocabulary. The spirals on Malta's temple walls mirror nautilus shells and galaxy arms, while the zigzags in Arizona's petroglyphs mimic lightning forks and mountain profiles. For the ancestral pueblones, stepped patterns painted on pottery replicated the terraced fields that fed their cities. These designs weren't just decoration, they were mnemonics, turning natural rhythms into visual mantras that reinforced ecological wisdom with every glance. A child tracing a spiral in the sand might unconsciously absorb lessons about seasons, while a hunter painting chevrons on a spear thrower could be encoding wind patterns for the chase. The most tantalizing theories bridge the sacred and the scientific. The 70,000-year-old crosshatched ochre from Blombo's cave, identical to patterns used by modern hunter-gatherers to represent water, suggests some symbols transcended time. Meanwhile, the serpentine coils on Bronze Age drums from Scandinavia align with solstice sunrises when placed at specific latitudes, a celestial code hidden in plain sight. Were these geometries maps, prayers, or both? Perhaps the answer lies in their duality. A spiral is both a whirlpool and a soul's journey. A grid can trap fish in its lines or thoughts in its squares. What's undeniable is their emotional resonance. When you run your fingers over a Stone Age meander carved into rock, you're touching a shape that soothed a nervous system 40,000 years ago, just as it might calm yours today. These patterns whisper that abstraction isn't a modern luxury. It's as ancient as fear, as primal as wonder. They remind us that before words, before gods, there was the line, the first stroke of meaning in a world waiting to be read. Beneath the soft glow of a flickering torch, a child's body is laid to rest in a shallow grave, their tiny frame surrounded by seashell bracelets and a dusting of red ochre so vibrant it stains the earth like dried blood. This scene, repeated across millennia from the banks of the Don River to the cliffs of Portugal's Lapa do Fumo, wasn't mere ritual. It was prehistoric humanity's first attempt to document the unthinkable. The careful arrangement of tools, the positioning of bodies curled like sleeping infants, the ochre's symbolic blush mimicking the color of life, every detail whispers that for our ancestors, death wasn't an end but a threshold. At Russia's Songir burial site, two children interred 28,000 years ago wear ivory beaded caps strung with over 3,000 meticulously drilled fox teeth, their legs adorned with bracelets that would have taken months to craft. These weren't casual offerings, they were painstakingly prepared passports for a journey beyond the visible world. The real revelation lies in what these graves omit as much as what they contain. In Germany's Aurignacian burials, men are buried with spear points aligned to celestial events, while women clutch grindstones stained with ochre, a gendered division of tools that maps their roles into eternity. Yet at Italy's Aran Candide, a young man dubbed the Prince wears a cap sewn with hundreds of perforated shells and rests on a bed of flint blades, his grave goods defying simple categorization. Some archaeologists argue these aren't just status symbols, but coded instructions for the afterlife. A flint knife to hunt spirit animals, ochre to replenish one's life force, shells as currency for unseen tollkeepers. The variations are as telling as the patterns. In some Neolithic tombs, skulls are removed and polished, then placed at the community's center like living archives. In others, bodies are disarticulated and rearranged in symbolic postures, as if death required translation into a new language of bones. Consider the emotional intelligence embedded in these acts. At Sweden's Skatholm site, A woman buried 8,000 years ago cradles a newborn in one arm, while her other hand rests on the skull of a swan, a creature whose migratory cycles symbolized rebirth across cultures. Nearby, a disabled man is interred seated upright on a deer antler throne, his walking staff placed within reach. These aren't impersonal rites, they're intimate farewells tailored to individual lives, suggesting prehistoric people documented personal narratives as carefully as communal myths. Even the ochre itself carries nuance. Some graves feature handprints in the pigment, as if to say, "I was here to mourn." Others show tools deliberately killed by snapping their tips, a practice seen from Paleolithic Europe to ancient Japan that might have released the object's spirit for afterlife use. The most poignant evidence comes from the children. In Malta's Hypogeum Halsaflieni, a subterranean necropolis echoes with the remains of the young buried alongside carved stone spheres that produce eerie, bell-like tones when rolled, perhaps lullabies for the afterlife. At Denmark's Vedbeek site, a newborn rests on a swan's wing, its delicate feathers preserved by acidic soil, while the mother's grave nearby contains a seashell from distant shores. These choices, swans that migrate and return, shells that whisper of oceans beyond death's horizon, reveal a sophisticated poetics of loss. The message is clear: prehistoric grief wasn't raw paralysis, but an active conversation with the unknown, using artifacts as translators. What emerges isn't some primitive fear of darkness, but a textured philosophy of continuity. The same cultures that painted vibrant herds on cave walls assuring the return of game also designed burials as cosmic maps. At Ireland's Newgrange, cremated bones are placed so the winter solstice sun illuminates them, linking flesh to solar rebirth. In the American Southwest, Puebloans buried their dead with baskets of sprouting seeds, turning graves into literal gardens of renewal. Everywhere, the dead are oriented feet toward sacred mountains, faces turned to rising stars, as if the body itself were a compass needle pointing home. Perhaps the ultimate lesson lies in the sheer labor invested. The mammoth ivory for Sungir's beadwork required hunting 50 foxes. The malachite for Egyptian green pigments traveled hundreds of miles. In an era where calories were precious, these weren't frivolous gestures, they were declarations that memory mattered more than efficiency. When a Neanderthal in Shanidar Cave was buried 60,000 years ago on a bed of carefully gathered yarrow and hollyhock plants still used medicinally today, they weren't just hiding decay. They were writing the first prescription for immortality, one part poetry, one part botany, and all parts love. These graves challenge our assumptions about primitive minds. The same people who left no written dictionaries built libraries of the body where a shell bead could signify sorrow, a spear point could promise reunion, and a sprinkle of ochre might simply mean you were here, and that changed everything. In their silence, they speak volumes that to document a life isn't just to record facts, but to insist against all evidence that the story isn't over. The frigid winds of the last ice age howled across Europe, driving herds of woolly mammoths and shaggy rhinos before them, and straight onto the walls of Shovet Cave. These towering beasts, painted in swirling black charcoal, weren't just artistic muses, they were daily realities, their migrations and behaviors etched into human memory with the same urgency as a modern weather report. But as glaciers retreated and temperatures climbed, something remarkable happened. The megafauna vanished from cave walls, replaced by red deer and boar, their sleek forms adapted to emerging forests. This wasn't just a shift in artistic preference, it was a living archive of climate change, painted in real time by witnesses who understood their world was transforming. Take the Lascaux Cave's famous Chinese horse, its rounded belly and spotted coat capturing a species thriving in the warming landscape. Compare this to the earlier mammoths of Rouffignac, their long fur and curved tusks perfectly adapted to vanished tundras. The difference between these artworks spans mere millennia but documents an ecological revolution. Even the pigments tell a story. As ice sheets melted, prehistoric painters gained access to new iron-rich clays, swapping out the deep blacks of manganese for vibrant reds and yellows, palettes literally shaped by shifting geology. Coastal cultures left equally vivid records. When rising seas flooded Doggerland, the once dry land bridging Britain to Europe, survivors carved haunting petroglyphs of fish and seals onto cliffs in Norway, their art migrating with the changing shorelines. Meanwhile, in Australia's Arnhem Land, rock art layers reveal a dramatic pivot. Older strata feature thylacines and emus, while newer paintings show barramundi and crocodiles, mirroring the region's transition from savanna to monsoon rainforest. These artists weren't just decorating rocks, they were keeping score in the face of ecological chaos. The most ingenious adaptations emerged where change was most extreme. In the Andes, prehistoric herders painted alpacas with distinctive coat patterns that still match modern breeds adapted to altitude shifts. Siberian petroglyphs near melting permafrost show reindeer herds altering migration routes, knowledge that would have been critical for survival. Even the mysterious rain animals of southern Africa's Drakensberg, their elongated bodies streaming with symbolic lines, may encode drought cycles, turning cave walls into prehistoric weather stations. What's humbling is realizing these artists documented shifts they couldn't possibly understand in modern terms. When a Paleolithic painter in Spain's El Castillo cave layered a hand stencil over an older bison, was she marking the animal's disappearance from her homeland? When Mojave Desert cultures switched from carving mammoths to bighorn sheep, did they grasp they were witnessing an extinction? Their art suggests they sensed the fragility of their world far more acutely than we often credit. The next time you see a climate graph, remember, the first trend lines weren't drawn by scientists, but by artists who mixed their paints with equal parts ochre and urgency, leaving us a message as clear as it is ancient: adapt or vanish. A reindeer antler baton carved 20,000 years ago fits snugly in the palm, its surface etched with a delicate parade of leaping salmon. At first glance, it's a tool for straightening spear shafts, but turn it over, and the artistry takes your breath away. Each fish's scales meticulously incised, their bodies arching as if frozen mid-swim. This isn't just craftsmanship, it's a paradox. Why spend hours decorating an object meant for rough, daily use? The answer lies in the way prehistoric cultures refused to separate the practical from the sacred. A tool wasn't just a tool, it was a canvas, a talisman, a bridge between worlds. Take the so-called bâtons de commandement, these antler rods once dismissed as hunting accessories. Microscopic analysis reveals something astonishing. Many show no wear from rope or wood, yet their carved motif spirals, animals, even human faces, are polished smooth from repeated handling. Some scholars believe these were prehistoric power objects, carried during rituals to channel ancestral wisdom or hunting luck. The same antler that could shape a spear might also, when engraved with migrating herd patterns, become a mnemonic device for tracking seasonal movements. Function and symbolism weren't just linked, they were inseparable. The artistry often hid in plain sight. A bone needle from Siberia, its eye no wider than a thread, bears tiny zigzags that mirror the stitches it created, a sort of maker's signature. In the Czech Republic, a mammoth tusk shovel displays not just wear from digging, but a constellation map pecked into its handle, aligning with the night sky during planting seasons. Even something as mundane as a stone axe could carry hidden meaning. At Britain's Langdale Pike, hundreds of polished axes were crafted from distinctive greenstone, their flawless surfaces never nicked by use. These were likely traded as ceremonial objects, their value lying not in cutting trees, but in their shimmering resemblance to water or new leaves, symbols of life's renewal. The most provocative examples blur the line between tool and text. The Ishango bone, a baboon fibula from the Congo, features notches arranged in mathematical sequences, possibly a lunar calendar or early counting system. Similarly, the Blombos cave engravings, those cross-hatched ochre chunks from 70,000 years ago, might represent the first instruction manuals, their patterns encoding tanning techniques or trap designs. Imagine a hunter scoring marks onto a bone tally as he watches a herd, or a shaman etching medicinal plants onto a scapula to remember their properties. These weren't doodles, they were data storage. What's revolutionary is how these objects challenge our modern categories. We label things as either art or tool, but prehistoric makers saw no such divide. A spear thrower carved into a leaping horse wasn't just decoration. The curve of the animal's spine might perfect the weapon's balance. The dolphin figures on Inuit snow goggles weren't whimsy. Their sleek forms reduced glare by mimicking nature's design. Even the humble grinding stone could double as a cosmological map, its circular grooves echoing the sun's path across the sky. Perhaps the deepest lesson lies in the wear patterns. Many engraved tools show smoothest polish precisely where human fingers would grip them during use. This suggests the act of touching the designs, feeling the ridges of a carved bison or the dots of a star chart, was itself meaningful. Knowledge wasn't just seen, it was held, literally etched into the body's memory through repetitive motion. When an apprentice shaped a flint knife under their mentor's guidance, they weren't just learning technique. They were inheriting a world view where every scrape of stone carried echoes of ancestors, where beauty and utility shared the same heartbeat. These artifacts whisper that for our ancestors, survival wasn't just about brute force, it was about weaving meaning into every action. A well-worn adze with a spiraled handle didn't just fell trees, it connected the carpenter to the cyclical rhythms of growth and decay. A harpoon incised with seal silhouettes didn't merely hunt, it honored the pact between hunter and prey. In their hands, the mundane became sacred, and the simplest tool could hold universes. The flickering firelight that once illuminated cave walls didn't vanish with the Ice Age, it simply found new canvases. As humans transitioned from nomadic hunters to settled farmers, their storytelling tools evolved too, trading mammoth ivory for clay and turning pottery into portable narratives. Consider the Vinca culture's ceramics from 7,000 years ago, their surfaces etched with symbols so consistent they've been called a proto-writing system. A single jar might bear zigzags for water, spirals for the sun, and clusters of dots representing harvest yields, a whole agricultural cycle captured in swirling glaze. This wasn't just decoration. It was a revolution in documentation, compressing stories into objects that could travel, trade, and transmit knowledge across generations without a single spoken word. What's striking is how these evolving techniques mirror shifts in human cognition. Early cave paintings like those in Lascaux depict individual animals in dynamic poses, a focus on the immediate and visceral. But by the Neolithic era, pottery designs like those of the Minoans tell sequential stories. Goddesses flanked by lions, ships sailing past dolphins, dancers mid-ceremony. The human mind had begun to weave narratives rather than snapshots, reflecting new capacities for abstraction and linear thought. Even the materials tell a tale. Ochre pigments gave way to kiln-fired mineral paints, their permanence echoing societies putting down roots. The real game changer was portability. A cave painting stayed locked in one location, but a Sumerian cylinder seal rolled its mythic scenes across wet clay tablets, mass-producing stories like an ancient printing press. Similarly, the intricate geometric patterns on Andean textiles didn't just keep people warm, they encoded origin myths, with each color and shape holding meaning. A child wrapped in such a blanket wasn't just clothed, they were literally swaddled in their culture's cosmology, yet perhaps the most profound shift was in audience. Cave art often hides in deep, inaccessible chambers, knowledge for initiates only. But a Greek amphora's painted legend stood in the marketplace, its Achilles and Hercules tales democratizing storytelling. This transition from secretive to shared reflects societies growing more complex, where collective memory needed to scale beyond the shaman's whispered words. The ultimate proof of this cognitive leap lies in something easily overlooked: the invention of frames. Where cave art bleeds endlessly across rock, Bronze Age artists began compartmentalizing scenes. Egyptian tomb paintings use registers, Minoan frescoes employ borders. This seemingly small innovation reveals a monumental mental shift, the ability to isolate moments in time, to say, this story starts here and ends there. It's no coincidence that the first true writing systems emerged from these very cultures. The human mind had learned not just to tell stories, but to structure them, laying the groundwork for everything from epic poetry to PowerPoint presentations. What's humbling is realizing these ancient innovators faced the same challenges we do today. A Mycenaean potter simplifying a bull leaping scene for mass production wasn't so different from a modern filmmaker adapting a book for the screen. The Minoan artisan who painted octopuses with documentary precision on marine-style pottery was the David Attenborough of their day. And when a Cucuteni Tripilia culture artist molded clay figurines with exaggerated hips and shoulders, they were crafting the first comic book superheroes, symbols of strength and fertility to inspire their communities. The thread connecting charcoal smeared on a cave wall to cuneiform pressed into clay isn't just about better tools. It's the story of the human mind learning to hold time in its hands, to take the fleeting and fix it into form. Every time we swipe through a smartphone or curl up with a novel, we're using cognitive tools forged not in Silicon Valley, but in the kilns and caves where our ancestors first dared to say, listen. Let me tell you a story. A wounded bison charges across the cave wall, its entrails spilling in coiled ropes of ochre, a visceral image painted 15,000 years ago in Spain's Altamara cave. Beside it, a human figure lies prone, stick limbs splayed, while a bird-headed shaman stands watch. This scene isn't just a hunting tale, it's a psychological mirror reflecting fears and fascinations that still pulse through us today. The repetition of such motifs, birth, death, the hunt across continents and millennia, suggests something profound. Prehistoric art wasn't just documenting the external world. It was mapping the interior landscapes of the human mind. Carl Jung called these recurring symbols, archetypes, the primordial images etched into our collective unconscious. The Venus figurines with their exaggerated fertility features, the labyrinthine spirals that appear from Ireland to Peru, the ubiquitous handprints stenciled like echoes of identity, these aren't cultural coincidences. They're evidence of a shared psychic vocabulary. When an artist in Indonesia painted a buffalo sacrifice 20,000 years ago using the same compositional rhythms as a bison hunt scene in France's Lascaux, they were tapping into something deeper than imitation. They were giving form to the universal human drama of life, struggle, and transcendence. Consider the dominance of hybrid creatures, part human, part animal in prehistoric art. The sorcerer of Toifria's cave with his stag antlers and owl eyes, the bird-headed figures of Egypt's Wadi Sura, the fish-human petroglyphs of Scandinavia. These aren't mere fantasies. Jungian scholars argue they represent humanity's earliest attempts to reconcile our dual nature, the instinctual self and the conscious mind. A shaman donning antlers during ritual wasn't just disguising himself, he was accessing the archetype of the trickster, the boundary crosser who navigates between worlds. The art became a bridge between realms, both physical and psychological. The most haunting evidence lies in the caves themselves. Recent studies of acoustics in Paleolithic caves reveal something extraordinary. The chambers richest in art also have the strongest reverberations, with resonant frequencies that match the human vocal range. When chanting in these spaces, voices take on an otherworldly quality, as if the rock itself is speaking. Could this explain why certain symbols repeat across these sonic hotspots? The dots and zigzags surrounding Altamira's bison mirror the phosphine patterns humans see during altered states, suggesting these artists weren't just painting what they saw with their eyes, but what they witnessed in trances. The caves became theaters of the mind, where flickering torchlight animated the walls into a proto-cinema of collective visions. Yet prehistoric art also reveals our ancestors grappling with individuality amidst these universal themes. The hand stencils found from Borneo to Argentina, each as unique as a fingerprint whisper of a need to assert, "I exist within the cosmic narrative." The so-called wounded man figures, like the speared hunter at Cosca Cave, introduce something startlingly personal: vulnerability. These aren't just archetypal heroes, they're records of individual trauma and resilience. Even the palette choices carry psychological weight. The shift from blood-red ochre in burial contexts to cool manganese blacks in lunar notations suggests an intuitive color symbolism that still influences us today. What emerges is a paradox. The same cultures that painted perfect, naturalistic animals often depicted humans as stick figures or abstract forms. This wasn't lack of skill, it was likely deliberate. By rendering animals with such anatomical precision, they honored the sacred other, while stylizing humans might have reflected spiritual humility or a belief that the true self transcended physical form. The Lascaux shaft scene, where a bird-headed man faces a disemboweled bison, becomes a psychological self-portrait. Humanity forever caught between the animalistic and the divine, between destruction and meaning-making. The ultimate lesson lies in continuity. When a modern viewer feels uncanny recognition staring at a Paleolithic horse painted with motion-blurred legs, a technique rediscovered by Edward Muybridge in the 19th century, they're not just admiring ancient skill. They're touching a thread that connects all human minds across time. The same neural pathways that fired when a hunter-artist mixed charcoal with bear fat to capture a charging rhino still light up when we frame a sunset with our phone cameras today. Prehistoric art shows us that before we invented writing, before we built cities, we were already hardwired to transform experience into symbol, fear into form, chaos into story. The caves were our first therapist's offices, the paintings our earliest dream journals, proof that the urge to document isn't just about survival, but about the relentless human need to ask, what does it all mean? A handprint pressed into a cave wall in Argentina mirrors one stenciled onto rock in Borneo, identical in form, separated by an ocean and 15,000 years. This eerie repetition isn't unique. From the spirals carved into Ireland's Newgrange to those painted in Australia's Kimberley, certain symbols transcend geography and epoch, as if wired into humanity's collective imagination. The bison of Lascaux and the buffalo of Bimbetka share the same dynamic postures, their legs stretched mid-gallop. Even the peculiar, bird-headed figures of Francis Toifrier's cave find echoes in the shamanic art of South Africa's Drakensberg. These parallels aren't mere coincidence, they're clues to a profound puzzle. Did our ancestors independently arrive at the same visual language, or were they tapping into something deeper, a shared neurological blueprint for making sense of the world? One compelling theory points to our shared biology. The zigzags and spirals prevalent in Paleolithic art, for instance, mirror the phosphene patterns humans see during altered states, those swirls and grids generated by our optic nerves when deprived of light or stimulated by rhythmic chanting. When a San artist in Africa painted these shapes beside antelope herds, or a shaman in Siberia carved them into bone, they might have been documenting literal visions, not metaphors. Similarly, the ubiquity of handprints, positive and negative, could reflect an instinctual assertion of selfhood. Just as toddlers today instinctively press paint-smeared palms onto paper, our ancestors seem to have felt the same primal urge to declare, "I am here." Yet migration and cultural exchange likely played roles too. The sudden appearance of claviform club-shaped symbols across European caves during the last ice age suggests knowledge spreading along prehistoric trade routes. The Venus figurines, those voluptuous female forms found from France to Siberia, share exaggerated features, wide hips, pendulous breasts that may represent an early aesthetic meme, passed from group to group like a Stone Age viral trend. Even more striking are the similarities between the animal-headed shamans of Europe and the therianthropes, human-animal hybrids of Indonesia's Ling Bulu Sipong cave, separated by 40,000 years. Could these motifs have traveled with early humans as they migrated out of Africa, evolving like a game of telephone across generations? But perhaps the most haunting connections lie in celestial documentation. The Pleiades constellation appears as a cluster of dots in the Lascaux caves, the same pattern used by Aboriginal Australians to represent the Seven Sisters in their Dreamtime stories. Both cultures, wholly disconnected, linked these stars to seasonal changes. Lascaux's artists noting the cluster's autumn rising for hunting, Aboriginal elders using it to predict monsoon rains. Likewise, solstice markers appear in both Egypt's Nabta Playa, a stone circle aligning with summer sunrise, and Wyoming's Bighorn Medicine Wheel, a spoked stone calendar tracking the same event. These weren't just practical tools, they were evidence of humanity's universal need to anchor time to the cosmos. The most tantalizing parallels, however, emerge in death rituals. From the red ochre burials of Europe's Cro-Magnons to the shell-beaded graves of Florida's Wendover people, cultures worldwide used iron-rich pigments to symbolize lifeblood in funerary rites. In Russia's Songir, two children were buried head-to-head like yin and yang, while in Brazil's Luzia site, a young woman was interred in the same curled posture as a contemporaneous burial in Japan. This global language of grief suggests something deeper than cultural diffusion, an instinctual response to mortality that transcended isolation. What ultimately unites these artistic echoes isn't just shared experience or migration, but the raw, unfiltered humanity behind them. When a hunter in Chauvet Cave painted lions with uncanny anatomical precision, or a mother in Tanum etched a solar boat to carry her child's spirit, they weren't just decorating, they were reaching for the inexpressible. The handprints, the spirals, the star maps, they're all fragments of a conversation that began when the first human mixed charcoal with spit and thought, "This will outlast me." Whether through neurons, footsteps, or collective dreams, our ancestors left us a message as clear as it is universal. Wonder and dread, life and death, are stories we've always told together. The flicker of a smartphone screen mirrors the dance of torchlight on a cave wall, both illuminating our need to say, "This happened, this mattered." The same impulse that drove Paleolithic artists to mix ochre with animal fat now fuels our Instagram stories and TikTok videos, proving that beneath layers of technology, we're still those storytelling animals who once painted by firelight. Modern archaeology's laser scanners, mapping Lascaux's contours millimeter by millimeter, are direct descendants of the finger-fluted clay walls in Rouffignac Cave, where prehistoric visitors left their own "I was here" marks. Even the hashtag, that digital handprint, echoes the stenciled palms of El Castillo, compressing identity into a repeatable symbol. Anthropologists see this continuum in oral traditions. The griots of West Africa, who can recite genealogies spanning 60 generations, preserve history through rhythmic cadences not unlike the repetitive patterns on Ice Age bone flutes, both using music as memory's glue. Today's podcasts and audiobooks fulfill the same primal craving for knowledge wrapped in human voice. When we binge-watch documentaries about ancient civilizations, we're participating in the same ritual as those who gathered to hear epic poems about ancestral heroes beneath star-strewn skies. The medium changes, the hunger remains. Digital storytelling owes its deepest debt to prehistoric innovations in symbolism. Emojis, those tiny, universal pictograms, are the spiritual successors to the abstract dots and zigzags in Blombo's cave, compressing complex emotions into simple shapes. Virtual reality headsets that transport us to reconstructed Bronze Age villages achieve what Lascaux's artists first attempted, collapsing time and space through immersive representation. Even the algorithms curating our social media feeds unconsciously mimic shamanic vision, quests both filtering reality through personalized symbolic lenses. The most profound legacy lies in our enduring need to merge the practical and sacred. Paleolithic lunar calendars carved into antler become smartphone weather apps tracking harvest cycles. Inuit ivory maps evolve into GPS navigation, yet still rely on the same cognitive ability to translate symbols into spatial understanding. When climate activists today create data visualizations of rising temperatures, they're channeling the same urgency as the artists who painted disappearing megafauna during the last ice age, using documentation as both warning and prayer. Perhaps the ultimate testament to prehistoric influence is how we've democratized their tools. Where once only shamans could access hidden chambers to paint or interpret stars, now anyone with a smartphone can photograph, film, or livestream their worldview. The ochre-stained hands that once pressed against rock now swipe across touchscreens, but the message remains unchanged. We are here together, trying to make sense of this fleeting, beautiful world. The caves may have traded stone for silicon, but the firelight in our eyes hasn't dimmed. The deepest chambers of Storyt Cave hold a secret, paintings placed in recesses so narrow, no human could stand back to view them. These mammoths and lions, rendered with breathtaking precision, face the wall rather than the entrance, as if their audience wasn't us at all. This unsettling detail fuels one of prehistory's greatest mysteries. Who or what were these images truly for? Some researchers point to the acoustic properties of these hidden spaces, where chants would reverberate unnaturally, suggesting rituals meant to summon something beyond human perception. Others note how torchlight makes the animal's eyes seem to flicker, as if the cave itself was breathing life into them. The most provocative theory comes from the indigenous communities who still revere these sites today. They speak of the walls as membranes between worlds, the art not merely depicting spirits but inviting them through. Then there's the riddle of the symbols, those cryptic dots, zigzags, and ladder-like shapes recurring from Spain's El Castillo to Australia's Arnhem Land. At France's Niox Cave, clusters of dots align with lunar phases when projected onto the cave's topography, hinting at a prehistoric calendar system. Yet in Indonesia's Sulawesi, identical dots surround hand stencils in patterns matching neural activity during trance states. Were these early notation systems sacred codes or both? The Rosetta Stone moment remains elusive without a living context. These marks guard their meanings fiercely. Even artificial intelligence has joined the hunt, with algorithms detecting statistical patterns in symbol sequences that suggest proto-writing, though no consensus exists. The temporal paradoxes deepen the intrigue. At Spain's Maltraviso cave, a Neanderthal hand stencil dates back 64,000 years, long before Homo sapiens arrived in Europe. If true, it upends assumptions about art's origins, implying our extinct cousins shared symbolic thought. Meanwhile, in South Africa's Blombos cave, geometric engravings on ochre chunks persist across 20,000 years with near-identical form. What knowledge was so vital it required such obsessive preservation? The endurance of certain motif spirals at Newgrange, zigzags at Göbekli Tepe hints at cultural memory spanning hundreds of generations, a feat that dwarfs modern civilization's lifespan. Perhaps the most haunting questions surround the art's abrupt disappearance from caves around 12,000 years ago. As glaciers retreated, so did the underground masterpieces, replaced by petroglyphs under open skies. Was this a spiritual revolution, a shift in how humans related to the divine, or something more pragmatic, the rise of textiles and pottery as new canvases? The answers may lie in plain sight. In Turkey's Çatalhöyük, murals of vulva motifs and hunting scenes adorn homes rather than hidden chambers, suggesting art migrated from sacred to domestic spaces. Yet the old symbols endured, repurposed like ancient emojis, the spiral now a harvest tally, the handprint a family signature. The greatest lesson these mysteries teach isn't about the past, but about ourselves. Every generation sees these artifacts through its own lens. Victorian scholars imagined them as primitive doodles, while today's researchers decode them as shamanic interfaces. The paintings remain unchanged. It's we who evolve. As laser scans reveal new layers beneath known artworks and indigenous knowledge reshapes interpretations, one truth emerges: these creations were never meant to be solved. They're mirrors reflecting not just the minds that made them, but our own relentless need to find meaning in the dark. From the depths of caves to the heights of megalithic structures, prehistoric cultures didn't just leave behind artifacts, they gifted us an entire philosophy of memory. Every ochre handprint, every solstice-aligned stone, every myth passed across generations was a defiant stand against time's erosion, a declaration that some truths are too vital to be forgotten. These weren't passive records, they were active conversations with the future, crafted with the same intentionality as a time capsule buried beneath a city square. Imagine the audacity of painting bison on a cave ceiling knowing no human eyes might see it for 20,000 years. That's not documentation, that's faith. What's humbling is realizing how much sophistication lived in what we once called primitive. The Venus figurines with their exaggerated fertility features weren't crude dolls. They were manifestos about life's continuity, carved during ice ages when extinction felt imminent. The star maps etched into mammoth tusks weren't just calendars, they were proofs of celestial order in chaotic times. Even the repetitive rituals, the solstice light beams at Newgrange, the chanting in acoustically perfect caves, were early forms of data backup, ensuring crucial knowledge survived even if individual minds didn't. Our ancestors didn't just want to survive, they wanted their survival to mean something. This legacy raises provocative questions about our own era's documentation. Will a TikTok trend or an AI-generated image carry the same emotional weight as a handprint stenciled by torchlight? Can an algorithm ever replicate the urgency of a shaman painting a dying mammoth species onto rock, as if to say, "Remember them"? The irony is palpable. We've never recorded more, yet we risk preserving less. Our digital archives fragile against bit rot, our cloud storage vulnerable to the very climate changes we fail to address. The Lascaux artists understood something we're relearning. True endurance requires marrying medium to message. They didn't just paint on cave walls, they chose chambers with stable humidity to protect their art through millennia of climate shifts. Yet hope flickers in unexpected places. Indigenous communities today still practice oral histories with the same precision as their ancestors, proving that some technologies of memory don't need updating. Citizen scientists use apps to document endangered species, creating modern-day cave paintings with geotagged photos. Even the JWST cosmic images echo the star maps of the ancients, both saying, "Look how far we've seen." The through line is clear. Whether with charcoal or code, humanity's best documentation has always blended awe with utility, artistry with survival. So as we sign off from these ancient wonders to your modern screen, consider this: every like, every photo, every comment you leave is part of the same unbroken chain. The mediums change, but the impulse remains. We're still those storytelling animals, huddled around the glow of our devices instead of fires, asking the same essential questions: what matters enough to preserve? How do we make our mark before the darkness comes? The answers, it seems, were painted on cave walls long before we thought to ask. Now it's your turn. Press record, take notes, leave your handprint somewhere unexpected. The future is watching.